You doing all right?
Yeah, man, I had a weird dream last night. I dreamed I was a muffler. I woke up exhausted.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
Yep, I thought you were going to let me fill it in there.
I should have,
Yeah.
but you're exhausted, obviously. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play Music, whichever one you choose, we are there. And thank you for watching on YouTube, the old tube of views, Ben.
I didn't have to ask you if you mentioned YouTube.
The old tube of views. It's kind of like watching, my face and Spacebook.
The Two Utes. Remember that? What was that movie?
I'm not sure. Anyways, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach out to us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com, and we will gladly get back to you. And, we're going to get your phone number and ask you to have a phone conversation to see if we can better assist you in your situation that you're being dealt by your loved ones and your family.
Did you ever see the movie My Cousin Vinny? That's what it came from.
No. Are you with me?
Yeah.
All right, so Ben has no idea what I'm about to bring up, but it's something that
Before you go into that, you have a huge fan out there that wanted us to do a shout out.
Who?
Weston Bueno.
Your son?
Yeah, he wanted to make sure I did a shout out, and so Tom Conrad knew that he was his number one fan.
Oh, wow. Well, I've arrived.
Yeah, he's like, I want to hear it at the beginning of the podcast, Dad.
All right, Weston, here you go. This is your shout out. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to...
This opportunity comes once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Hello, Weston. I'm sitting here with your father doing a podcast, and hope you have a good football season and whatever else you're doing.
Yep.
All right, so let's move on. One thing I want to discuss, because I actually heard this today from one of our clients, and this particular person said that she had a hard time identifying with people inside the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for Ben and I to maybe have some banter back and forth and share some of our experiences with Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any sort of 12-step program, because there's, and Ben, speak into this, a lot of times, obviously you have to experience a meeting for the first time. And depending on what that meeting is or where it is or the people that comprise that meeting, is that the right word?
I think so.
Yeah. Can be a determining factor as to whether or not you're going to go back. And so I think, Ben, we should talk about, because people are going to walk into their very first meeting and it's going to be a shit show. They're going to probably hear something from somebody, possibly hear something from somebody that just does not resonate with them and is actually against or doesn't really represent a 12-step program in the right way. And it could, steer them away from it. So, let's talk about that a little bit.
Wow, talk about opening a can of worms, Tom.
That's what we're here for. This is real recovery talk.
I got
We're going to talk about recovery for real.
Part of me is curious which client it was, but I don't want to know who, because if I know the case, then it might throw in my
Biases?
insight and bias, if you will.
Okay.
Because we have a general idea what each client here kind of needs to work on, if that makes sense. So I don't want that to influence what I would say to our listeners that are in the millions worldwide, right?
Yeah.
So you open it up with, I didn't relate to anybody.
this particular person said that they couldn't identify. Yeah.
So, like anything else in life, you have to generally try something more than once. And there is going to be different personalities, different cultures at different meetings. One of my first suggestions is going to be, don't just go to one meeting, try a number of them out. And on top of that, I'll take it a step further. Try the same meeting out more than once. Because if I use my Friday night home group as an example, the personality of that meeting or the context or the topic or who came can influence how that meeting goes every Friday. And I would have to say, if you want to understand the culture and feel of my home group in particular, you would probably have to go about 5 or 6 times to get an average, if that makes sense. You can't just come on one Friday and be like, oh, I don't like that meeting. Or on the other end of the spectrum, oh, I love that meeting. Because who knows? The crowd varies. Some people are there some weeks, some people aren't. Sometimes you get let's just call it what it is. There's like a season, if you will, for recovery down here, which is weird. There's certain times of the year where meetings are more packed than others. So maybe you like a smaller meeting, a bigger meeting. The size fluctuates even depending on the time of the year, if that makes sense. But I find it hard to believe that if this individual has either tried the same meeting multiple times or tried different meetings, that they could go in and not find someone that they resonate with or relate to. The Big Book in particular, in the Doctor's Opinion, has a line that says, there are thousands of such situations. We may rely on absolutely anything they say about themselves. Those thousands of such situations, it doesn't matter what you're going through, where you're from, what your family background is. There are so many people in AA today that you can literally find somebody with your exact story. There is no one in there that's unique. And if you're saying that you're unique, you either need to look into yourself and get some insight and you're closed-minded, or you just haven't been exposed and you're too new to make that judgment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think with this particular person, it's that they haven't been exposed enough. They haven't really experienced enough and, gotten the opportunity to maybe meet different people and stuff like that. Because here's the thing. It's a very well-known thing in any aspect of life. What you put in is a direct result of what you're going to get out of it. And if somebody's in treatment with us, okay, we have a schedule that we have to adhere to. We can't just show up at the meeting really early, and we can't just hang out at the meeting late, a long time after the meeting. We have to get there, relatively close to when the meeting starts, and then leave relatively close after the meeting ends. Mm-hmm. So there's not a whole lot of opportunity to build bonds or network or meet people. So I understand that aspect of it, but it doesn't take much. It only takes 30 seconds, really. I mean, go up to somebody, hey, I liked what you shared in that meeting. I'm new to this. This is something that, I'm kind of having a hard time identifying with this meeting or, AA as a whole or NA as a whole or whatever A as a whole. But I liked what you shared. Would you mind if I got your number, give you a call later, and, we can have a conversation? Just something that simple, because a meeting in and of itself is built by the people that are in it. There's no book. Well, there's a book, but there's no rule book, I guess is the right way to say this, in terms of how a meeting should be run. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's actually part of the traditions. Each meeting can govern itself.
Right.
Basically, in layman's terms, as long as it doesn't affect the whole of AA.
Yeah, so and I'll use my own experience. The first real meetings that I got exposed to here in Florida, it was comprised of a bunch of people, and I built a lot of good relationships inside this meeting. But there was a message inside the meeting that was a little harsh, and I'll just share what it was. This particular group, we were all, for the most part, Christians, and I'm a Christian myself. But inside the meeting, it was like fanatical in a way. If you want to get sober, Ben, and you're here at this meeting, there's really only one way to do that, and that's through the blood of Jesus Christ.
See, a guy like me, if I'm straightforward, I would have ran straight out of that meeting.
And that is the point that I'm trying to make, is that, the meeting is made up of the people that are in there and the message that they are going to send. Now, with that being said, this particular meeting, it was a great meeting. It got a lot of people sober. It was around for a very long time. It helped a ton of people. But with that being said, it didn't really cater to the people coming in that didn't want to get kind of beat over the head with a Bible in their first AA meeting, and so that's the thing that is scary. And I just use them as an example, but there's other examples out there where you can go into a meeting, and this is one too. Let's talk on this. Here in Palm Beach County, there's a ton of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. I mean, they're all over the place. Hundreds of them on the hour, every hour, for the most part. I mean, I don't know if there's any like in the middle of the night, but maybe there are.
They start at midnight.
Yeah. So the vast majority of meetings here are AA. The vast majority of people here, at least in terms of people that are in treatment and that are, younger, are drug addicts, or they identify as drug addicts. Their drug of choice is, used to be heroin. Now it's fentanyl, or they think it's heroin and it's fentanyl, or it's cocaine and fentanyl, or crack and fentanyl, or whatever in fentanyl. Point is that it's drugs. And there's a lot of NA meetings, which NA is Narcotics Anonymous. That is really supposed to be more catered towards the drug user, but they're not as readily available as AA. So here at our center, because AA, there's a clubhouse right around the corner. It's an AA clubhouse. Both AA and NA operate off of the same 12 steps. They really are one and the same, I suppose. And you hear Ben and I banter on this all the time with especially other people. But when there's some meetings where these young adults will go in there and they're a drug addict and they just overdosed, and inside the meeting they'll bring up drugs. And then you got the old timers that are like, this is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this isn't something that we are going to talk about. You keep your share around alcohol, and that's it.
So to kind of keep it to the point of what we're discussing, this goes back to different meetings have different cultures. Man, Tom, you've really opened up a can of worms here. So Tom's talking about AA.
We need Eric, by the way. We should have brought Eric on this. Go ahead, sorry.
We have AA and NA, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and we even have one of our primary therapists, Maya, who's been on here before.
Yep.
She identifies as a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and Steve, our case manager, as well. With that being said, they're both from Broward County. Tom and I, we've done our recovery in Palm Beach County. They were both making the commute up from Broward up here. They've both moved up here since. But I recall when they first started working here, they're like, why doesn't Rock take the clients to any NA meetings? And we're like, there's legitimately like not as many.
Not anywhere close.
And we also have to match our schedule here at Rock. Don't get me wrong, like I'm all about like if we something matched up and we could get them to more NA meetings, because we've made the effort in the past, and for whatever reason, and they didn't believe me, but they came up here, and both of them, they drive down to Broward for their home groups, and actually came out and said, yeah, we're going to stick with, what are they down there? Palm Coast? They call their area Palm Coast, NA. But AA in Palm Beach County is definitely more prevalent than it is in
Broward,
and vice versa. So that's just using South Florida as your example. Like, and I've talked about it, Minnesota. I've got 12 and a half years sobriety at this point. I go up to meetings in Minnesota. I'm actually going up there the 21st for a couple weeks. Same trip I take every year to see family, get a cabin up there. But every time I'm there, I stop in the Minneapolis area or just on the outskirts, and I hit some meetings because I love doing that. And this is just my personal opinion. The meetings that I've gone to up there for Alcoholics Anonymous are nowhere near the quality that they are down here. Now, the NA up in Minnesota is actually better quality, and in my opinion, the NA in Minnesota is also more geared towards being helpful to the newcomer, kind of like Tom was talking about a second ago. So I think that's important. Tom brought up so many points during this that can be touched on. I think it's also important to look at the formats of the meetings. So not just AA, NA, there's CA, Cocaine Anonymous, Crystal Meth Anonymous. There's all these anonymous programs now. But also look at the formats of the meetings. When I was brand new, I like speaker meetings, where open speaker means somebody goes up, they tell their story for about 25 minutes, and then it opens to the floor, anybody that wants to share on what was shared. But you got somebody that basically gives their what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Versus today, when I'm further along in my recovery, I actually like literature meetings that follow the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous, where my recovery has evolved from when I first came in. I like to hear other people's stories. So like whoever this person was in group, like I could find someone to relate to, because relating is absolutely key. You have to get into these meetings, and let's call it what it is. You do have to relate. But also to our point, you need to make the effort to relate. You got to try out enough meetings, maybe attend the same one, like I said, multiple times to make sure you get a taste for what that meeting actually is, and not like an off week with that meeting, if you will. What else was I going to say? So the formats has changed. Oh yeah, Tom had brought up, and sorry, I got off a little on a rabbit trail, but I want to come back to it. Tom brought up how in AA we have what's called the singleness of purpose, and we're supposed to focus our problem on alcohol, right? So the meetings that I go to, Alcoholics Anonymous, in this area, I'll be straightforward. There's a lot of talk about drugs, and it is acceptable in our groups because our group conscious is okay with it. A group conscious, each meeting has like a business meeting once a month, and any concerns get brought up. You make motions, you vote on them as it relates to the group. And again, each group is basically self-governed, if you will, so long as it doesn't affect AA as a whole. So the meetings that I go to, like, you can talk about drugs if you want to talk about drugs. Now, Tom's correct. There are some meetings out there, and I think that this depends where you are geographically. But there's parts of the country where I know if you go into an AA meeting and you say you're a drug addict, you will like literally get booed out of that meeting. And the same thing with Narcotics Anonymous. One time I had quite a bit of sobriety, so I was able to handle it well and navigate it and carry a message. And by the end, like, for lack of a better way to put it, had the respect of the NA folks. But my good friend asked me, and he actually introduced me at the meeting. Ben actually does another fellowship, but his story definitely fits this, and he identifies as a drug addict. So I invite him in to speak. And when he mentioned that, I did AA at the beginning of the meeting, the whole meeting was like, ooh. By the end, I won him over. Don't get me wrong, but that drives me crazy personally. There are some hard-headed, in my opinion, they're hard-headed, old-timers that just don't change with the times. I understand there's a reason to have singleness of purpose. I don't want to get too crazy into this because these are like, old AA traditions. But even Bill W., the founder of AA, was, there's literature out there in history. He wrote a letter to another member named Bob. It wasn't Dr. Bob, basically talking about allowing people to have their own experience with the big book. Don't push your interpretation of the big book in meetings on somebody else. Use the literature, allow them to have their own interpretation. Because me forcing my interpretation on somebody, using the same literature or not, is still me like getting too involved, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course.
You got to allow people to have their experience. I mean, there's a lot there.
Well, I think what it boils down to is, and I'll never be convinced of the old timer, like what you were saying, the singleness of purpose. In my mind, the singleness of purpose is to get somebody clean off of drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. That's in my book, or in my frame of mind, that is the singleness of purpose. I don't care if it's drugs, alcohol, it doesn't make a difference to me. So, for the old timers and stuff, I get it. I understand it. But go form your own group somewhere then. Go off and have your singleness of purpose there. Because the vast majority, and I have to just reference, South Florida because, and I get what you're saying. Like, you go to backwoods, West Virginia, or whatever the case is, a lot of them are going to be strictly alcohol, even though, drugs are everywhere, but there's also AA and NA everywhere. But somebody that's on drugs may want to work an AA program because it's the original. It's where all this started. And I just think it's not fair to them to have to go into a meeting and feel like they're not welcomed because they're a drug addict. But even though they are an alcoholic too, I don't know. It's frustrating for me, and it's...
Since you brought this up, I actually like to back this stuff up with as much factual knowledge as I can and literature. But for instance, there is a book called Pass It On, which, I went through my phase of AA when I had about 3-4 years sober where I really got into like the history. I've forgotten most of it at this point. But this one really sticks out to me. There's a book called Pass It On, and there was a guy in New York who showed up to a meeting who was a heroin addict. And he went into this meeting and basically called himself a dope fiend. And, that AA meeting was like, well, what do we do with this guy? So if my memory serves me correctly, I think it was Dr. Bob that showed up to the meeting and or did the correspondence or whatever, and basically said if this guy shows up to the meeting and calls himself with a dope fiend with the desire not to drink today, then he can stay in the meeting, because the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. So the proper way, according to the history of AA and its founders, is to announce yourself in a meeting as a dope fiend with a desire not to drink today. Because not having a desire to drink is the only requirement for membership. Mm-hmm. So I just like backing that up with actual literature. I believe it's on it's somewhere in the 300 pages of the book Pass It On. And it was the guy that brought it to the attention. His name was Barry. So I just like backing that stuff up. And I want to follow that up with maybe I've talked about this before, but my first experience ever, it was my second meeting ever, actually. First one, I went to Oasis Club. My buddy dragged me in there surfing. That's a story for another day. He's like, I'll drive us surfing, and then just drove me to the meeting afterwards. Damn. Because he could see I needed it, but I wasn't ready at the time. But anyway, I end up in my first treatment center, and they have an open meeting at the treatment center where outsiders are welcome in. So here I am at the treatment center that I'm staying at in PHP. I'm living there on the property, and these outsiders come in, and it's outside close to the beach, and they do the preamble, all that stuff. They do a go around, and everyone's, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic. I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic. Me literally not knowing any better, because I'm a respectful guy. If the group wanted me to introduce myself a certain way, I would have. I still do today. But I introduced myself. I'm like, hey, I'm Ben. I'm an addict. And the chairperson goes, what? And we were outside, so I thought he just couldn't hear me. So I was like, I'm Ben. I'm an addict. What? So I answered for a third time. I'm Ben, and I am an addict. And the guy just gives me like this scowl. And the guy next to me nudges me. He's like, you got to call yourself an alcoholic. Keep in mind, I had maybe 10 days sober. And this guy with years of sobriety is giving me a hard time. He came into the treatment center that I'm at as an outsider coming in and is going to give a guy who's didn't know any better. It was literally my second meeting ever in my life and give me a hard time. How is that helpful to the alcoholic who still suffers?
It's not. And that's the whole, yeah, I mean, it's.
So I've learned, like, yes, there's traditions. Yes. But you're helping people and you have to keep people in mind that they're still not well. If somebody's new to a meeting, or heck, man, maybe they've been coming for years and they just can't stay sober, still treat them the same, with dignity and respect.
Yeah, I mean, we're running out of time here, but let's talk to the people now that aren't, 100 years old with 50 years of sobriety that fall into this. You have to be an alcoholic. You can't identify. Let's talk to people that have, some sobriety time under their belt. If you are somebody that goes to meetings and somebody walks in and they identify as an addict and they get, shunned or scolded in some way, and you pick up on that, I believe it's your responsibility to go to that person either at any opportunity and talk to that person and let them know, hey, listen, what just happened there? Because that is something you often hear the terminology inside meetings, take what you want and you leave the rest.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that I'm going to leave. I don't need that. If whoever it is doesn't want me to say that I'm an addict or whatever the case is, I don't need that, And I think we are held to a higher standard. Those of us that have been in the rooms for, any period of time, really, and a newcomer does come in, I believe it's our duty to provide them with a welcoming atmosphere. And if you do pick up on something like that happening, it's your responsibility to go introduce yourself to that person and strike up conversation and let them or help them feel comfortable. Now, they may never come back to that meeting ever again, but get their number, give them a call. Hey, listen, that meeting, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'll meet you at this meeting over here, such and such date and time, because people will, I reference this a lot. When I find a new restaurant, you have one opportunity to impress me. If you don't, I'm not coming back.
Good analogy.
When I walk into this restaurant, whatever restaurant it is, first off, I don't want to stand there for 10 minutes without somebody coming to greet me. At least I'm fine getting put on the wait list. You want to put me on the wait list for 45 minutes? That's fine. But make sure somebody is there to tell me that. When I get seated, I don't want to have to wait for 10 minutes to get a glass of water. I'm not ordering soda anyway. Give me a glass of water. When the food comes, the food better be tasty. If the food's not tasty, I'm not coming back. So on and so forth. We get the point. You have one opportunity to impress me, and if you don't, I'm not going to come back to your restaurant. I guarantee it. I wish people would treat meetings the same way. Not necessarily as a consumer, but as the hostess, as the servers, as the cooks, The newcomers are the customers. They're the people that are coming in for the very first time. This is their very first experience with AA. Maybe it's not their first experience with AA, but we don't know that. We just know it's their first experience with this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And we have one opportunity to impress this person, to show them, hey, this is a good place, and this is where we want you to come back to, and we want you to continue to come back. If every AA meeting or NA meeting or whatever could adopt that type of mentality, then we wouldn't have the people that say, oh, I just can't identify.
And I understand we're at a meeting too, but I can speak for myself, and I hope more people do this. Take individual responsibility for this as well. Like if I have somebody that I know that like I invited, hey man, why don't you come to my home group? I'll grab their hand, almost literally, and be like, sit right next to me. That way, if something happens, like I can like nudge over and like explain what's going on or why that happened in the meeting or what this is about or what that's about. Like, hey, you don't have to do this part. You should do this part. You don't have to go get a white chip, but this is what that's about. You know, because I think for those of us who have been to meetings before, we take for granted what that's about. Because like even I just brought up the chips, for instance. I think about this all the time. If you just, you know, randomly on your own, haven't been to treatment, anything, you got a drinking problem, you're like, I'm going to try out this Alcoholics Anonymous. You look it up online on Google and you just show up to a meeting. And at the end, they're like, does anybody want to pick up a white chip? For all I know, that person doesn't even know what that means. Like we can't make assumptions that people are educated on this stuff, you know? And real quick, I want to bring it back to your original question too about not relating. Something that I've mentioned possibly in the past is the sponsor that had the greatest influence on me, him and I have like nothing in common other than our alcoholism and our addiction. I think I've shared on this before where like as a newcomer, I was looking for somebody like me. And what I actually needed is somebody that was nothing like me. Like I wanted somebody that surfed, that liked the gym, that was about the same age. The sponsor that had the most effect, I had the best experience with, I should say. Him and I have like nothing in common. We're not even really like friends. Don't get me wrong. Like I'd do anything for him. He'd do anything for me, but he's not somebody that I would like spend the weekend with.
Well, and I think a lot of that boils down to the fact that people just want to be comfortable and they want to find somebody that, you know, has the nice car, has the same, you know, all the things that you just said, surfs and does all, but I share with people all the time, I don't want you to look for those sorts of things. I want you to look for wisdom. I want you to look for people that have experienced this, that have gone through this process and can, because we have to remember their primary purpose is to take you through the 12 steps, and that is it. Solely that's it. They're not your financial advisor. They're not your relationship coach. They're not your whatever the case is, marriage therapist, counselor. They're none of that. All they are is somebody to take you through the 12 steps. Now, it's morphed into more than that over the years. I mean, I don't throw stones at people that develop friendships with their sponsor. My sponsor was in my wedding. You know, now granted, he took me through the 12 steps, and then 3 years later, he was in my wedding. We developed a friendship, but that was okay, you know? But anyways, that's a topic for another time. Whole sponsorship thing.
I really feel like, you know, at least for me, by the point in this podcast that we're recording, it's like, I really want to remind people that are familiar with meetings, are familiar with sobriety, whether you have sobriety time or not, if you're familiar with this stuff, you have a responsibility to think of the people that have no experience with this.
Yeah.
You know, we're selfish and self-centered as alcoholics and drug addicts, and we absolutely have a responsibility, an individual responsibility, in my opinion, to help these newcomers.
Yep. I agree. Well, I think I was pretty good, Ben.
Yeah. That was an interesting talk. I'm glad. I didn't know what we were rolling into.
Yeah.
This cold brew did me some good. I feel I was exhausted at the beginning.
I got a pump right before.
Yeah.
Good workout in.
Yeah, show him your rip.
My what? Oh, I tore my hand.
Yeah.
Deadlifting.
So, and it's right outside my office too, so you hear like bang, bang. Tom dropping 315 on the floor repetitively.
315 repetitive.
Yeah, I threw that in there.
Yes.
I was gonna beef you up to 405, but
No, I ain't doing 405.
he was doing 315.
I might do 405 for like 2.
Well, from the bangs, he was doing 315 for sets of 50.
Wait, what? 315 for 50?
Yeah.
No, I can't do that.
Well, that's what it sounded like in my office.
No. That was actually 115 for 50.
Oh.
All right. Well, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in the end. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. That is it. We will see y'all later.